thank you for joining in on behalf of the Ashank Desai Centre for Leadership and Organization Development. It is a pleasure for me to welcome you all. The Leadership Storytellers is yet another marquee initiative of IIMA Ahmedabad. This is a platform that brings the ideas, the insights of renowned experts to bring forth the most trending leadership issues from a storyteller's lens. And who better to do it for today's session than the inimitable Arvind Agarwal and TV Rao. Arvind and TV Rao, of course, need no introduction. Besides all their other stellar achievements and pursuits, they are both most recently celebrated authors of the best-selling book, Crucibles of HR Leaders. And in conversation with them today is IIMA star professor, Professor Biju Warki. A warm welcome to you all, our audience today. You are all encouraged to post your questions on the Q&A. Welcome to Leadership Storytellers, Arvind and TV Rao. The stage is all yours.
Welcome all speakers, participants. It's once again, let me welcome Dr. Arvind Agarwal and Dr. TV Rao to the forum. And let's start with a small presentation from both of them.
Hi, everybody. It's a special privilege and honor for me as a grad from IIMA Ahmedabad from the 70s today to be sharing through this forum the recently co-authored book highlights. And I have just very, very few slides to walk you through. So firstly, as the name suggests, name of the book, Crucible. Crucible, as you know, is the vessel that medieval alchemists used in their attempts to turn base metal into gold. And leaders literally get baked through these intense defining experiences and emerge stronger and transformed. In fact, Warren Bennis and Robert Thomas, they called such events crucibles, and they wrote an article on Crucibles of Leadership. We've been highly influenced by this work, which Warren Bennis and Robert Thomas did way back in the early 2000s. And as you know, that crucible experience could be both positive, very profoundly challenging, as well as somewhat violent and sometimes even life-threatening. In this study, we had in-depth interviews, sometimes spreading across 5-7 hours, largely in person and some over the Zoom as well, listening to the life stories of these leaders. What was it like in early childhood? What was the family context? Who are the key influencers? Academics, environment, influencers, choice of subjects, profession, influence of teachers, what kind of professional careers they pursued, first job, subsequent career progression, challenging assignments, professional network, involvement in the professional network. In all these, what were the points of inflections and what choices they made? What were the life lessons, competencies, and values that they imbibed? So this is a galaxy of 30 leaders, and many of them will be well known to you, though we call them HR leaders, but many of them were way beyond HR. They've been running businesses as CEOs over the years, and some of the CEOs moved across to become CHROs. So though these are stories of HR leaders from our perspective, but they're actually stories of leaders in the making. And we have captured crucible experiences, as we mentioned before, family, parents, teachers, educational institutions, first job, bosses, stretch jobs, industrial relation exposures, setbacks and reverses, role making, how they learned from high quality training programs, engaging in professional forums, and volunteering into social causes. Through all these experiences, we learned several lessons, and they exhibited certain kinds of competencies. TV, you want to walk us through the kind of competencies these leaders exhibited?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Arvind. Well, actually, the title Storytellers. So we have 30 stories in the book, fairly elaborate kind of stories. And what we had done was, after we listed the crucible experiences of all these leaders, we tried to look for indicators of competencies. And we listed about 584 competence indicators and classified them into these 4 categories. These were all broad classification and makes a lot of sense. We discovered that all these leaders exhibited quite a bit of business leadership, which includes business acumen and integrating ability, whether it is integrating functions or integrating regions or businesses and so on. Second set of competencies are functional competencies dealing with their particular function, which is largely HR. And the third is the personal leadership. Fourth is professional leadership, which goes far beyond the functional competencies, this leading to the profession. Functional may be in relation to some of the other functions they have handled, whereas professional leadership is the profession they belong to. And I think a good part of the competencies, particularly we observed them, some of them, of course, even from an earlier age, but at a later kind of age, we found almost all of them getting involved in larger societal issues. So that is an important competency because that changes the perspective and so on. So these are the broad category of competencies. And we also looked at what kind of values these 30 leaders have exhibited. And we found, we have given in the brackets number, trust and trustworthiness, about 21 of them. It doesn't mean that the remaining 9 are not, don't have this, but I think this is very visible, remarkable kind of competency that comes out. Integrity and honesty, about 20. Discipline and being fair and firm with people, selfless and respectful, sacrificing for peers, reinventing self, superordinate goals and other kind of things. I think you can see on the screen. I'm not repeating all this. It's given fairly good detail in the book. So this is a very important finding that we have. Now, these are all very honest people with a lot of humility. And post-pandemic, what we talk of as empathy and other kind of things were exhibited by these leaders much earlier in their career and so on. So this is a contribution that we have made from this book, both the competencies which fit into various frameworks which we examined later. We saw the SHRM framework, the CIPD framework from UK, and our own national HRD networks, HR Scape, actually done by Arvind and team. We found that all these frameworks fit in very well with whatever we have. So we don't say that our findings fit with them or their frameworks fit here, but I think this is a great discovery to see such a great alignment of all these kind of things. So from these, we have drawn lessons for parents, as I think Arvind has mentioned, for institutions, for bosses, for organizations and things like that. And that is just to give you a glimpse of the book.
Yeah.
I'll stop here and pass on to.
So likewise, thank you, TV. I would stop the slide sharing, and Biju, we would love to hear the thoughts and questions that you have in your mind, and TV and I would respond to them.
Great. So good evening once again to everyone, and both my panelists whom, we can say that they were more than professional friends to us. Maybe take a little bit of time to introduce them in the context of IIMA, which maybe let's start alphabetically. Dr. Arvind Agarwal is an IIMA alumnus and, of course, a doyen in the area of management, ran businesses, and headed HR. A very great person with whom all of us have learned. He has been part of what you call IIMA's many courses, in fact, what you call as guest faculty member, interacting with the students, etc. Of course, Professor TV Rao is our old-time colleague and still many of us refer to his books. I grew up reading his books, and it was a proud privilege to actually get associated with him, know him, interact with him. And it's like two of those very interesting minds in HR have come together and created an extremely thick book. Okay, and I'm really impressed by the fact that they have been able to, caricature, give a lot of insightful insights about this, about the HR leaders. And what I really liked that they have used this word called baking. Okay, it's like, how people are baked. And baking is definitely one of the oldest form of cooking. And it actually talks about, and unlike, other forms of cooking, baking is unique, I understand, is that because it considers the old food. And it actually takes over a period of time, it actually converts that food into much more edible and maybe I would say useful material. I have a few questions based on my cursory reading of the book and maybe my thinking about it. I have some questions which I'm going to throw to both of them.
Sure.
And I also see as a part of the list of people who have actually joined, some of the people whose histories are covered in the book, stories, whose baking stories are covered in the book are also part of here. And welcome to all of those people. Welcome to this on behalf of IIMA Ashank and the Ashank Desai Centre. So my first question is that you have chosen a very interesting life history methodology, charting the life history of the people. Possibly, why did you choose that?
So Biju, yeah.
Yeah, and then I have a side question for that.
Right. Sure. So first thing first. So Biju, this is a very storytelling approach.
Yeah.
Right. We are telling stories, real stories of real people who we touch and feel every day. And many readers of this book would have grown with these leaders, but would not have known their stories. I myself, I've grown with many of them. I've worked shoulder to shoulder, maybe 30, 40 years. But when I listened to their stories, I realized that I knew only 10, 20% of them. And the details of all the struggles, all the points of inflections, the baking process, as you rightly indicated, I was not aware of any of those. So following this approach and cherry picking those moments which have been impactful in shaping their character and personality, we felt would be very inspiring for professionals in all walks of life to read and benefit from.
Great. Thanks. David, would you like to?
Yeah, well, all these are at the time we have chosen, as we mentioned in the book, we have used about a dozen criteria. And most important criteria is the impact that they have made on the people around, not only their juniors, but the society, the profession, and their presence either through social media or through the professional bodies. I think quite a few of them were presidents of HRD network, either the chapters or that national level. And you don't become a president of network unless you have done a great job in your own company. Okay. That is how I think that is a very important criterion for us in terms of, so we have seen their work, every one of them, we have seen their work. Some, a few of them may be a little younger in age, but I think even at a young age, they have made some remarkable kind of contributions. So that is what made us to get into this. And for me, actually, it was Arvind's idea. And when Arvind approached me, what impressed me was the word baking. We started with baking of leaders. I said, Arvind, I think all the time we were talking of making, but I think this baking is a good one. And I would love this word to see the entire process of their growth and development as leaders, starting from childhood. That is, I think, how we developed the interview schedule. In fact, I think we started with about a list of 70, and we could cover only about 30 of them. And of course, by the time we completed, the 70 may have grown to a few hundreds. But that was too late to go back.
Yes, that's great. So I feel a compliment on you on this unique approach, and I'm sure it would have not been an easy task for both for you as well as the people who actually would take a lot of time in terms of recalling it and putting it together. And congratulations on that. It's beautifully articulated. Each story is a very interesting thing to learn. In fact, in our earlier interaction with you, you actually said that, told me that you should read something about some of the people who you know, and you are, you will be surprised that you won't, what do you call, you will be surprised that you don't know anything about them till now, and then you know a lot of other interesting and very, very interesting things have come out. Let me say that 30 people, I'm sure you had a list of 70, but you could, let's be with the 30. And many of them are very modest, camera shy people. I know some of the people have to be really cocks to get into the limelight.
Yeah.
How did you convince them to actually to be featured? Okay, was it like, how did you convince them to share their baking stories?
Right. So,
okay. Some of them are very private people.
No, many of them are, I totally acknowledge. And I am very grateful that they were patient with us and they candidly shared their story. And I think maybe both TV and I had an advantage that we had worked with most of them over many years. So we had very healthy respect and mutual trust with each other. That sort of paved the way. But above all, they really trusted us with their stories. And we mentioned to them that they could be very candid. And when we have written up their stories, we will circle back to them. And we will check with them whether they're okay for us to go with this story. If there is any element they find particularly embarrassing, or they feel that it should be nuanced somewhat, we'd be happy to take that on board. And in fact, one person did back out when we had written his story, and we went back to him that this is the story we picked up from you, and we are going with this. And he said, my God, have I said all this? This is very private. So Arvind, I would like to back out with due respect. Please go ahead with the book, but not with my story. So we respected that decision as well. So TV, we actually originally had 31 and one backed out. So we were left with 30.
A small follow-up question on that. Does that person regret? I'm sure he would have, he would be regretting it now.
Well, that is his private call. And so I wouldn't hazard any guess on that.
Okay. I have a question to you, TV. You've done a lot of academic research, qualitative research, and case writing. How different was this methodology which you adopted for this from the traditional academic research, which you pioneered? But definitely no work in HR in India goes without a reference to your work. So how?
Well, if you really follow my work, a large part of what I have done is on the basis of stories. Either it is a company or a system or a new practice and things of that. In fact, I think the reason why HRD Network, when we started it from wing number 15 of IIM Ahmedabad, it spread very much was because we were using stories of different companies and using every chapter as a mechanism of. So this methodology to me is an outcome of a series of developments that were taking place in our professional field. If you go back early 60s, McClelland's entire discovery of competencies came from his work with foreign service agents of US. Then Boyatis worked on the competent manager. Then Spencer and Spencer came up with BI technique. So I think if you look at, there is a kind of an evolution of qualitative research, which is getting converted into competency movement. And we were constantly learning, disseminating either at IIMA or later on in the consulting firm that I started. We were doing all of it. So I don't think it is, I think it's a natural evolution that has happened. And I think actually this question, Biju, you should ask Arvind, because it is he who has interviewed a large number of these people. And I don't know, consciously or unconsciously, he used very well the critical incident technique, but we didn't call it critical incidents. We called it crucible experiences, which to me are more or less like critical incidents. The only difference is critical incidents talked of critical incidents, whereas crucible experiences were much larger, dealt with everything and so on. So I don't say that this is greatly a new kind of a thing, but this is an evolution of whatever research, qualitative research we have been doing, and I'm sure any one of you would do the same. I still remember, if I look at our own fellow students at IIM Ahmedabad, Rajan Gupta spent a full year observing and observed their behavior, spending weeks together with them. I think I don't want to say that this is a greatly new methodology. The only thing is, I think a full book being written by this, such a voluminous kind of thing, that is what probably makes it different, novel, and so on. I mean, that is the way I perceive it. But thank you for your compliment.
And Biju, for me, it was a novel experience. Listening to these stories, they were all getting etched in my head. And once we were done with the stories, a pattern emerged. And it was a very additive process through which pattern was getting formed in my head. And after the stories, we just wrote the first draft of what we have heard. And then we sort of, fine-tuned it to make it presentable enough for the book. So this was a very unique for me personally. And I enjoyed the whole process.
That's great. So let me just get into the next thing. One of the very intriguing phases of it is the page 10, where you really come up with a framework. Okay, yes. The baking framework, or which I call the bakery.
Right.
Yeah. So, can you explain a little bit about that? Okay, that entire model which you had. I'm sure this model would guide a lot of scholars, a lot of practitioners over the periods of time in terms of the the whole leadership development. Okay. So
yeah, so the model itself is a fairly simple one. It talks about right from childhood through the entire career of an individual, all the crucibles that the person goes through, and what were those experiences that influenced him or her in terms of shaping the character, personality, and we captured them. And this process is fairly straightforward if you look at the framework per se.
Yeah.
The actual challenge is in getting down to what you had just a moment ago asked, a person to be able to debrief candidly what those crucible experiences were. And people were reflecting what had happened to them 50, 60 years ago. And in many cases, they said, we've never shared this story with anyone. And even for them, it was the first time they were coherently narrating their story. And it was a moving experience for them as well. That to me was more important and critical than the framework.
TV?
Yeah, the framework was rather simple. To some extent, I think as I mentioned earlier, we were influenced by whatever we have been reading, lecturing, researching, and so on. But most importantly, we drew the framework, as Arvind has said, at the end of the exercise after we started putting the crucible experiences. I think it's a pretty simple kind of a framework and answers basic questions like how does leadership get big or develop? What is the role of the childhood experiences? Then I think it's a very logical thing. Then the school, then the college institutions, then the first job, then the bosses. I think to me, it appears to be a pretty logical and in a way, one can say commonsensical kind of a thing. But maybe unknowingly, we were all influenced because if you look at long ago, I've been working on doctors in the making and things of that nature. So I think it's a interesting kind of a framework, and it's I would say in a way nothing that's shaking, commonsensical kind of a framework. That is what I would think.
Okay, great. Okay, but let me say that, and rightfully maybe limited by the sample which you had selected, that group HR, it might call the baking of the HR leaders. So I have another follow-up question on that.
Yeah,
How
please.
generalizable is this framework? Or in other sense, is that will this bakery work for other roles, other CXOs, the CEOs, the entrepreneurs?
So Biju, while we have called it HR leaders, but actually, if you look at the names of those 30 people, nearly half of them have been in the business role. They have been CEOs.
Yes.
Many of them, you know.
Yeah.
Right. So, and some of them have been CEO and they moved over to HR function.
Yeah.
So
like you.
Well, like me, yes, and like a whole lot of others as well. And thank you for reminding me about my own stint in the business role. But the point I'm making is that the crucible experiences had shaped the development of these leaders, regardless to whether they were in HR function or outside HR. So that itself is clear evidence that the framework is very general and it is applicable to all function. And in fact, TV and I often talk about that our fond hope is that the framework gets used and more stories are written about leaders in other functions.
We hope so, that I'm sure you have, it's like set a trend and it should follow a series of people who would pick up that and use maybe the framework to build on it, revise it, upgrade it so that we can understand. Again, an associated question. One of the discussions which we will have, I know there are people like you who moved from business into HR, and of course there are other people who have moved from HR into running businesses, running huge banks like Anil Khandelwal. Okay,
Yes.
whose stories whom you have covered. And one of the debates I think in the profession is always that, like, the HR person transiting to the CEO role. Okay, from your life experience which you have covered, any specific crucibles experiences which actually helped in that transition? Okay, from a leader of a function, leader of what you call the HR function or the people function, to really managing at a P&L.
Yeah, so it's difficult to isolate an element because the whole process is a baking process.
Yeah.
And so many ingredients go into it. And TV just shared with you the values and competencies. So all of those, if you look at, they are competencies and those are values which would help a person succeed in any function.
Okay.
They're universal.
So maybe generalizable. Okay, that's good. Maybe the next question is about, it's a very interesting mix of the good and the bad experiences. Could you share with all of us some of those things which really touched you or which are on the top of the mind, which you would feel? And, those bad experiences, how it really became an extremely different changing point.
Yeah. Lots of them, Biju. And TV, help me. I'm just trying to recall as you're asking. There is a person, K.K. Sinha, who was director of National Thermal Power Corporation. In the peak of his career, he loses his daughter,
Okay.
who was still a teenager. And somehow he personally holds himself responsible that he was not able to give adequate attention to the family because he was so over-focused on the work. And that had such a profound impact in his thinking and the kind of a role he would like to take. Of course, it took him some months to get over it, and then he got back into track. But it was a kind of setback that he recalls during the time when he was narrating this instance. I saw him personally move. There is an instance of Rajiv Dubey, who was managing director of Rallies, who had variance of views with the board of Rallies at that time. And he decided to move on. And the kind of struggle, the inner struggle that he goes through to discover, where did I go wrong?
Yeah.
And he recognized through his father's advice, who said, whatever results you see is not completely by your effort. Your effort is one of the 5 ingredients. So don't drown yourself in sorrow just because you've not succeeded. Equally, I would not advise you to gloat just when there is a success, because there are so many other enablers which go into the making of success. So equanimity, which we talk about, was the message which he received from his father at that moment. I'm sure he would have received that before, but in that moment of despair, when he receives that message, which calms him down and moves further in life, those are the kind of examples. The book is replete with such examples. There is an example of Pratik in the early stage in his life, when he was in TVS Electronics. He had to fire the very people he had hired because of the business not going so well. And it was such an emotional experience for him. He actually, after doing so, he kept many of these young engineers in his house till they found a job. And he started phoning up his friends, utilized his XLRI network to see that everyone is placed. So he was so value driven and had a tremendous sense of responsibility toward each one of them. So I can go on, but these are just few examples which I'm sharing right now in this session. TV, you may like to add some examples which you may recall.
Well, actually, and Anuranjita, for example, when she missed it, when she was expecting to be promoted in London, didn't get the promotion, was very disappointed. Certainly, I think the kind of image it creates around, and then she wanted to resign. But the most interesting thing is she found a coach, and how the coach helped her to deal with it, and it really changed her subsequent kind of orientation and so on. But Biju, since you asked what any surprises, to me the biggest surprise in most of these stories, consistently, I always use to say human resource development is not industrial relations.
Yeah.
Industrial relations is certainly the basic part of it, but HRD goes far beyond. And to my biggest surprise, I discovered almost every one of them mentioned they're dealing with IR as the point of change of their life. I think they acquired phenomenal, different kind of competencies. So that is a consistent theme that came after interviewing a good number of these people, that you should have a stint in IR. That is what really builds your HR competencies. This is a very surprising conclusion, and I seem to be quite sold on it 100% at this point of time.
Yeah, thank you. This was something which I always used to talk about for the past many years by telling is that HR competencies are incomplete without IR competencies. And IR really does not mean that you need to have to fight with unions. It's about dealing with the collectives, dealing with the groups. Very great, very interesting insights about what you call setbacks and very personalized experience about setbacks, how they actually learn about it. But many times, I'm sure all of them have experienced success also. And it's very easy to get success, to get into the head. Okay, could you throw some light on how they actually handle success? Because all of them are giants in their own way. Okay.
You know, most of them, as you had mentioned, are
Hello?
I think I lost Arvind.
Arvind,
Arvind did warn me, sometimes there may be power offs. So I'll answer this question in a different way, but I'm sure Arvind will tell you when he gets back many stories.
myself.
Yeah, okay. We'll
okay,
ask you,
Arvind, we
Arvind.
lost you for some time.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So I don't know where you lost me, but let me
At the start.
at the start. Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, when we shared the story, once we had written and we went back to them to say that please factually correct it. Most of them came back to tell us that there is too much focus on me. But everything I have achieved is not because of me. It's because I had supportive bosses, I had the kind of context, I had a wonderful team, and so on and so forth. So all of that reflects that these are people who are full of humility, who give credit to people around them rather than taking the credit on themselves. They were very quick in accepting the blame if things didn't go right, but they had all the humility to share the credit. And all the 30 stories are full of such situations.
So it's humbleness, humility is
Humility,
hallmarks of.
all of them.
Okay, so you, in a way, I would say is that you allow yourself to be baked.
You allow yourself to be baked. You are open as a person to take all the inputs, information, and you have this sense of, that I am a custodian and I'm a trustee. And that is what makes them institution builder and not as an individual efficient manager.
I just like to add one point to this, Biju. I think there are two interesting ways in which people have handled success. There are many ways which are mentioned in the book. One of them is, I think, is very clearly evident in a case like Anand Nayak. When you succeeded, you stick to your company, come up with new innovations, look at larger kind of issues. So I think he is one example of handling success by sticking to the company, making a difference, coming up with totally a different kind of business outlook where he gotten into the farmers' social responsibility and a whole lot of things. And then, of course, he traces it partly to his education at XLRI, a bit of it and so on. But there are others who, I think, as they succeeded, certainly thought they should create new roles for themselves, either in the same company or elsewhere. So this sense of success did help some of them to use opportunities wherever they had opportunity in terms of working in a different region of the same company or getting into a different company and so on. When you examine most of these cases, you will find a good number of them who did change jobs. And that is, I think, what also helped them to make as leaders. But there are also people who didn't change. Now, for example, Arvind himself, almost about 20 years in one company, Shantra Mishra for longer than that period in Birla Group, and so on. I think you will find that both kind of examples you will find is. So way to handle success is either look inward, look at the company and do something marvelous in the same company you're working, or look for opportunities elsewhere and make use of those opportunities. Wherever you can make a difference, you go there. I mean, that is the way I want to look at this. Would you agree with that, Arvind?
Yeah, and they were also energized by their success to do more and even different things. So none of them, despite reaching success early in their career, they did not stop growing. They continued to reinvent themselves and go for bigger heights, trying to do different things, challenge themselves, and share those experiences also with the professional bodies in professional forums.
You know, many times one of the, maybe the criticism about it is that sometimes when people become successful and grow in their roles and become icons in that, those things, they become like banyan trees.
Yeah.
Where what you call not much vegetation grows under. Were these leaders able to actually create? Definitely they have been able to inspire a lot of people. Okay, but they were able to create more leaders. And how have possibly the next line under them done? Any insights on that?
All of them. All of them took pride in developing their people who have become giants on their own rights in other organizations. And the stories are replete with such examples in every case.
Okay, so let me just move into some of the factors, you know, in the making, you know, the concepts are extremely important. I know as an academic institute, I should actually come and talk about, you know, the role of, and you have really put colleges as a very, very critical factor. And many of the stories which I read, they do acknowledge both, you know, both colleges and even teachers. Okay, so maybe many of them have attended the regular stream of a college 30 years before, 35 years before. And if you reflect on today's colleges, institutes, okay, and particularly the business schools confronting both, you know, the future of management education, okay, what would be the role of colleges be in terms of, what would you draw from that? What could these colleges, schools of who train these leaders do?
Yeah, so that's very interesting question, because not just the teachers, but the entire environment of the institute, the college. And we are not talking about just the so-called Ivy League colleges like XLRI, Tata Institute or IIMs, even relatively less known colleges and universities and schools which people went through. In terms of value building, the institutions played a big role in the way they handle the discipline. For example, there is a story where you know, some of the students made a lot of noise when there is an external speaker. And the director was very upset. And he said, people who are responsible, please come and see me in the office following day. Director did not know what to expect. But some 3 people did turn up. Prateek Kumar, who is covered in the book, is one of them. And he says, look, I was really disturbed. I didn't know what will happen to me. Will I be rusticated? Do I have a future? But nevertheless, he owned to his mischief, and he was in front of the director in his office. And director said, you know, what you did was not right, but I appreciate your honesty of taking the ownership. Now, those words Prateek recalls was so profound and deeply impacting. And he says, to date, I remain a very transparent and take ownership of all my actions. On the contrary, if the director would have taken a different stance of actually punishing him, then he said, I don't know what kind of a leader I would have grown to be. So this is but a small example, but in a life of an institute, school, college, such situations do arise. And how are these situations handled make a huge difference in building the kind of a character we're talking about.
So, Professor Rao, would you like to reflect on this from the case of maybe the future of management education? Because situations have changed. Okay, the student profile is changed, the faculty profile is changed, and maybe there is always a complaint about business schools is that only one thing matters is possibly placements. And of course, one thing matters for the faculty is publication. So there is
research.
Yeah. So P&P is the paradox we deal.
Yeah. Well, as far as the schools and colleges are concerned, I'm not talking about the postgraduate institutions, but if you look at schools and colleges, one lesson we got from these leaders is the kind of projects you give them, the kind of experiences you put through, either in the scouts or extracurricular activities, all those kind of things. They make a lot of difference. I think today, at least some of the good institutions, good colleges seem to do a great job. I'm saying this from the kind of experiences that are being narrated in relation to experience of my own daughter and son-in-law when they have taken my grandson for admission to engineering colleges, what they see. I think there seem to be a lot of emphasis on project work, a lot of emphasis on co-curricular, extracurricular activities and things like that. But when it comes to management education, I think remarkable thing we noticed in our book is specific names being mentioned by some of the leaders. If I ask myself, are we able to give that kind of an experience? I have a little bit of a question mark. I don't want to say that there's nobody that gives that experience. There are, I think, professors who you can see either in Facebook or in LinkedIn, very, very few professors. The moment they put a post, immediately a good number of students, alumni come back and then respond to them. But these must be, let us say, 1 in 1,000 or something like that. But if you look at most of these schools, I think, and then look at, I think, what the kind of names that were mentioned in 80s and 90s, either it is IIM or XLRI or TIS or any of these institutions, I am not sure. I have a question mark. And you must pardon me for my ignorance. I am quite worried about the research, excessive research orientation, excessive research to publish in A-star journals, which are rarely read by people. I have not heard any of these leaders say that they have read any of these A-star journals, A-class journals. But on the other hand, they interacted with faculty who made a difference in their lives. So my worry is today in management education, we are too much focused on research, which is not of much, I would have question mark in terms of their immediate practical value in building leadership competencies. So instead of focusing only on A-star journals, if you focus on preparing A-star individuals, A-star managers, I think we will have a lot to contribute to the development of leadership. So my thesis on the basis of this, and then whatever little experience I have, is we have become too much target driven. We have become too much the FT and business India, etc., ranking driven. And even in the institutions, we are target driven in terms of number of research articles. In fact, in one of the institutions where I'm working, I have been struggling hard to tell them on the board that, look, we would like to see faculty who made a difference in the lives of students, not in the journals of A-star journals and things like that. It's very, very difficult to sell because that is not valued even in the IIMs, very unfortunately. So I think these leaders were produced by A-star professors who focused on student and looked at them as an individual rather than 8-star journals and research papers. This may be too much of an extreme point, but I think I'm quite committed to this point of view at this point of time.
Thank you.
And Biju, what I found was that the personal connect that the teacher displayed,
Okay.
whether it was a primary school, college, or postgraduate institution, at all levels, the teacher's personal connect with the student had a lasting impact. And there are stories right across all of these 30 HR leaders who told us about, and they were life-changing. The choice of subject, profession, whether to study abroad or stay in India, all of these really happened by teachers' impact.
Okay.
Really life-changing. And people are recalling after 40 years, 30 years. It's amazing.
Oh, great.
And good part of this is outside the classroom.
Much of it is outside the classroom. That is also true. People taking personal interest to talk to the student, saying, how about pursuing this? I think you have a natural talent for this.
So let's, at this point, let's take a pause and take some questions. We have a couple of interesting questions which have come up. Okay, so who else then, other than, Satish Pradhan, okay, has an interesting question. And in fact, Satish I think, is a friend of IIMA and has been forthright in some of the points which we talked about. And where I think, we all know that once he showed at the mirror by telling us that what you are doing is that preparing people for the Pushkar fair. And we do agree that, sometimes we end up doing that. It's a very interesting question. Thank you, Satish, for asking this question. How did you balance in the course being empathetic to the participants and being objective about the research? Okay. And I'm sure that, in this sort of method, I think that is something which is very, very important.
So we had a set of questions which we had formatted.
Yeah.
We had sent the questions to the individuals, but when I was in front of the individual, I said, leave the questions aside, tell me your story.
Okay.
And I was listening to the story and I was not thinking about the questions. After listening to the story, then I said, okay, let's go to the questions. See whether we have dealt with all of the questions. Is there anything left?
Yeah.
So therein, there was an opportunity for us to stay objective and not lose sight in case we are missing out on any aspects. So this was the process, starting with empathetic listening and ending with objectivity.
Wonderful. TV?
Yeah, actually, Arvind, when he interviewed, a lot of these interviews amounted to 50, 60, even more pages. Although he mentioned 7 hours, it is 7 solid hours of recording. But if you look at all the other things, it is a lot more. Why I'm saying this, when a person speaks, he or she would speak with his or her own perspective in mind. So we'll have to listen. It's all subjective. There is nothing like objectivity. And we are interested in capturing this subjective world. So what makes objective is the generalizations we draw from these 30 people and the consistency in these generalizations. So as far as the cases are concerned, I perceive each leader as a distinct kind of a person. You cannot compare one person with the other. Yep. Each one had different kind of circumstances and so on. So the question of anything like what is objectivity, I think I would start with this saying that the objectivity is in listening, in empathy, in getting the stories out. And whatever, I think they say, we trust what they have said. And the only validation I can say at this point of time I had was, after we completed this book, some of these leaders were being invited in different forums. And I made it a point, even Arvind made it a point to listen to them. And when we checked back, what they were saying in these forums and what we have recorded, we found an extremely high degree of alignment. Many times we found that every significant point we noted, is there some point we missed? Is there something new that has come up? So I think that is one form of, you can call it test retest reliability or parallel form, whatever you want to call it. But I think this is just a sample of about half a dozen of them. I think that is, so I think this, when a leader, when reflects about his or her own life and talks about it in response to certain kind of issues, the person is a well-established leader. I don't think he or she is likely to lie. This is what I strongly feel. Yeah.
Also, TV, as you rightly mentioned, each of these are a unique, successful leader on their own right. And to be honest, I did not know that there would be any pattern that we will discover, because they are so different from each other in the public life that we see them. So for me, when a pattern emerged in my head, it was a eureka moment that there is underlying each of these, there is a pattern. So that was discovery. Otherwise, we were just going ahead, recording the stories, and it was a very exciting journey. And we said, let's see what happens.
As I agree with Mr. Murthy, who has commended that by telling this three, cases would provide rich foundation for case-based qualitative researchers to further really look into the mind and the development of leaders. That's really exciting. I just saw one more interesting question from Jayesh Patel. Okay, and I'm sure it relates to a very interesting concept of resilience. And post-COVID, I think we were all flush with resilience, webinars, talks, and pop pills. How did you, and when you looked at the journeys of these 30 people, what insights about resilience? You talked about some points on setbacks and how they overcome setbacks, but how did they cultivate that power of resilience?
And that was visible right across all the 30 stories, because each one of them had reverses of one or the other kind. Some in the early childhood itself, some later in life, but they all experienced those setbacks. But they were surrounded by people they could reach out to. Of course, their own personal strength as well, to come out of the dark hole and move forward. So they saw learning out of each of those instances. So they had the humility to learn. And none of them lost their way, which is truly admirable.
It was very, very admirable. Okay. Yeah. And how do you say? And
I would,
yeah.
little caution I would put, while I agree totally with Arvind.
Okay, yeah.
Sometimes when you look back historically, let's say at the age of whatever age you are, 50 or 65, and then you are talking to somebody who is interviewing you, I think we may unconsciously have a tendency to glorify everything that has been done. And we have not, in our writing, we have not done any accounting for this, because we trust. I mean, that is the positive side of it. When an experience occurs, I think you live that experience and you get disappointed. Now, there are cases, I mean, when, let us say, Pratik says he had to terminate people who were his friends whom he has recruited. It was a torturous kind of a occasion. He didn't know what to do. He was at a loss, but he had to do it. He had done it. And all that he could do was to invite them to stay with him. I mean, that is to me a great indicator of what you are now calling it as a resilience. But at that time, it was pain.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's the same thing. If you look at, you will find very interesting incident narrated by Anil when he's one of the branch managers, early part of his career, Anil Khandelwal, his branch managers were having IR issues. He promptly went and wanted to lodge a complaint with the district magistrate. And the district magistrate discouraged him, but he went ahead. Then he came back and reported to the regional managers or someone, and the manager scolded him. Why did you do that? You're going to get much larger issue on this. And then he went back to the district magistrate, and the district magistrate now gave him left and right, because I'm putting it in my own words. You have it described in Anil's own words. So this is you see, you are beaten by both sides. Now, at that point of time, you are at a loss, but you start then recapitulating. How did I manage this? So managing these traumatic events is what made these people as leaders. So the term resilience we are using now is, when you look back, as Arvind has rightly said, they withstood these kind of things.
Yeah.
That we are saying it now, but at that time, it should not underestimate the kind of sleepless nights they may have gone through, the kind of, but I think the fact that today they have emerged out as well acknowledged leaders across, I would say, the globe, not only in India, many of them are acknowledged across the globe. It says that this perseverance, resilience, I think, comes out of these crucible experiences. So that is where crucibles become an important part. You're churned, and that's the way I look at it.
Right. And TV, besides their own values, many of them also had a very clear purpose. So they were purpose driven as well.
Okay.
And therefore they knew that they have a larger purpose, a longer term purpose, and they were not deterred by the setbacks. They navigated their way to move forward. So it's very nuanced. Each person went through a unique situation when it comes to setbacks and reverses, and they demonstrated either by people around them, by their values, by the sense of purpose, they move forward.
That's great. Okay, now moving on, there are a couple of very, very interesting questions also we'll take, but I can not resist but asking a couple of questions. Another very important driver or component of that is bosses.
Right.
Okay, would you throw some insights about, is it good to have a good boss, or is it good to have a bad boss?
Well, I wouldn't say bad boss is a toxic boss, and that is not a pleasant situation to be in. And I think among our 30 HR leaders, in the stories that they have narrated, we've come across some situation where they were stuck with the bad bosses who gave them difficult times, but our people were quick to get out of that situation and found their own sphere of influence within which they could still contribute and move forward. But more interesting is when you have demanding bosses and, of course, supportive bosses.
Okay.
So, bosses come in all
shapes and sizes.
Absolutely. And the important thing is that each of these 30 leaders demonstrated that they have to find their own ways of moving forward. They cannot just, and it goes back to, if you have a bad bosses, it's a situation of how do you demonstrate resilience?
Yeah.
How do you navigate your way?
Right.
And some of them have demonstrated that.
And there are one or two cases where you will find with a bad boss, you decide not to
Continue.
On a matter of principle, not to continue.
Not to continue.
And and then you make it very clear. There's a value issue. And I think the cases also show, while the boss may have been bad, the boss said, okay, if you have taken a decision, it's fine. You're most welcome to come back anytime that you want.
Okay.
So that's the reward they get for being value driven and being firm. And then the person leaves, of course, and I don't think the person has chosen to come back, but that's very nice. That says that, look, at least somebody in the company appreciates.
Okay. Yeah. In fact, again, going back to Satish and Subran had used a very interesting this thing was anyone from those stories, they have charted the path not taken. You know, extremely risky, because I'm sure one of the abilities which when I read this thing is that maybe the ability of risk taking. Okay.
So
anyone who possibly did the very unconventional things.
So several, but one I would like to cite is Dilip Ranjekar.
Oh, yes.
He was on the peak of his career as a corporate HR chief of Wipro.
Yes.
And, there was an opportunity, and he was asked by Mr. Asim Premji to look for a CEO for Asim Premji Foundation. And that set him thinking. And then he volunteered himself to come out from a thriving career as a CHRO of a global company like Wipro to come. And it was very undefined, unchartered position, CEO of Asim Premji, that he moved forward. You have Shantra Mishra. At the time he signed up as a CHRO for Aditya Birla Group. He recounts in his story, he was given one room next to the toilet with one broken computer and one assistant who had just put in his resignation in the basement of the office. And Shantrup had no background of being a CHRO, leave alone of such a large enterprise. And he was reporting to Mr. Kumar Mangalam Birla, himself new to the position that he had responsibility for. That was a huge risk. And he was until then in Hindustan Unilever, the bluest of the blue chip company. And there was no compulsion for him to take that career move, but he took the risk. So several examples you would find where people took the risk, and in those situations, they created a role for themselves and moved forward.
Crafted their own roles and identities.
Absolutely.
And, associated questions, because this is something which I'm working on, is that the legitimization of the functions. Okay, so how do you create legitimization and the identity creations of the functions? And any insights on that, how possibly as CHROs and HR leaders, they actually created that identity and uniqueness within their own firms, okay, that or earn that seat on the corner on the table?
So there are two sides of these challenges. One is the employee advocacy. And we talked about immersive experience in industrial relations, how that baked the character and personality of the HR person to earn the battle scars and the trust and respect from the people. So that's one side of it. The second is having very immersive experience of the business itself also. What does the business need? And to be able to bring forward those initiatives which are equally beneficial to the business without losing sight of their responsibility as an employee advocate and as an employee champion. So managing this balance, which they demonstrated right through their career, is a story which is truly inspiring, contained in this book. And at no stage, they lost the trust of the employee. In fact, Hema Ravichandar says very nicely that on a Sunday afternoon, if you get an unknown call on your cell phone, and you don't pick it up, you're not an HR person,
Okay.
because that call could be from one of your employees who is looking for a help.
Okay.
So there were these kinds of complete commitment
Okay.
that under no circumstances I will drop the ball.
Okay, that's actually very,
Yeah.
very, very insightful.
Yeah, my answer to that question, in addition to what Arvind has said, is that their personal example. I don't think they would have tried to create a niche for the profession by doing anything what we may talk of in our textbooks. One is, I think, by their own personal example and their own kind of behavior. And what they have contributed to the profession is largely, many of them you will see, through the bodies like HRD network.
Okay, yeah.
Like if you look at this entire competency movement, or looking at assessment centers, or even getting, I still remember in Ahmedabad when we started the HRD network, Ahmedabad chapter, we used to get line managers and HR people interact. We even used to get union leaders to come up with. So these are all the contributions of leaders, if you look at, in terms of building the profession, using the professional bodies and teaching in institutions. Like I think some of them teach in institutions, go back and give guest lectures, and some of them write books.
Right.
I mean, you know, many of them, Harish has written, Anil has written quite a bit, and books have been a lot more impactful in terms of, Vissi has been writing regularly in People Matters. So
Yeah.
some of them have, the way they have contributed is through the professional bodies, their writings, their talks. And I mean, that is one of the criteria which we have used in terms of
Absolutely.
choosing these people. Yeah.
Yeah, which wonderfully talks about the need for networks and how professional bodies can help. And both of you are active and to be the founder members of this great professional body, the HRD network. Okay. And any thoughts on what you call for emerging leaders, or how you do you leverage professional, what you call the networks and the professional bodies as a learning experience, as a crucible experience? Okay, not just a job search experience. What you call
No,
talent.
no. Yeah, absolutely. And among the 30 HR leaders, there are examples how at a very early stage, they were able to learn from the professional body and contributed to it. G. Sridhar, for example, he was still in early days in Gaskin Williams, and he was competing for young managers competition, which All India Management Association organizes. And he had really moved up in the race, and he got attention of his own senior management within Gaskin Williams. And Arvind Ray, who was ex-Metalbox, who was the managing director of GKW, he asked him to do a manpower planning exercise for Indian Institute of Packaging.
Okay.
And he was doing manpower planning for this professional body. And later, of course, he actually got a job offer from Metalbox.
Okay.
Right? It was not a job search for Sridhar, but it just so happened.
Yeah.
R.R. Nair, he was still in DCM early days, pre-Unilever days. And he was very active with professional bodies like IIPM, Delhi Management Association, ISTD, etc. And in IIPM, he met Ranjan Banerjee from Unilever. And that association led to his joining Unilever ultimately, where he spent right from 1973 onward to the time of his retirement. So there are cases right across, even at an early stage in people's career, they have benefited, they've contributed, and it has been tremendously learning experience for those of us who've been associated with professional forums.
So, you also have extremely interesting, comments from a couple of people who really has appreciated that work. Okay, so one from Professor Ramdar Singh is, I would like to read it. It's a
Right.
it's a, what do you call it? It's a place of, it's a congratulatory message. It's a evolutionary psychologists and behavioral economics are claiming that people have a cheater detector mechanism in their brains. The mechanism gets automatically activated in any interactions. So your own self observations replicate what you have been demonstrating in lab experiments. Congratulations for this validation. Passion and commitment to understanding managers are really commendable. Okay, so that's one which I thought I should.
Right. Well,
Thank you.
Really,
my deepest gratitude to Professor for this acknowledgement.
yeah. So another, you have another question from, which I actually thought about the personalities. Okay, Mr. Avinash. Tyagi, who had the questions is that, did you, notice any, what you call as personality types, similarities in personalities between these people? Okay,
So personality types are really reflected in the set of competencies which we looked for.
Yeah.
In fact, there is another set of material that we have put together, but it's not there in the book, and that is the leadership style.
Oh, yes.
The book is already, as you mentioned in the opening comment, is already a bulky book.
Yes.
So we couldn't go past the publisher to add that chapter on leadership style, because surely these 30 HR leaders, they are all successful leaders, but they have varying styles of leadership.
Great.
So we have not brought that up in the public domain at this point in time, but at the right time, I'm sure TV, we should bring that out as well in form of an article.
And definitely we will have another book talk about that.
It may not be a book, but it certainly will be an article.
Okay, definitely looking forward to read it and possibly discuss it. Now I have, to one very maybe an observation which I think which possibly is a little bit something which I noticed, which makes, I'm sure some of you also would be uncomfortable with that. Not many women in that group. Why? Okay.
So yes, that is a serious limitation of the book, and we have acknowledged that in the book right up front.
Yeah.
Partly because of the time that we have taken in our book, in the sense we really started working on this book way back in 2015.
Yeah.
And when you go back from 2015 to those who had already 30, 40 years of experience, at that time, there were not many women in HR profession in the forefront.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Now situation has very dramatically changed. In the passage of these 7-8 years, we have now very successful women leaders right across all functions, including businesses. So if today we were to write this book, I'm sure there will be many, many more women leaders. And, in fact, there's a team which is already working on this. And I would request TV to share more information about that.
Yeah, well, actually, we became very conscious of this as we completed the book. There was a third woman who could have been there, but we were unable to get her because she was herself writing a book. So she excused herself from this. Otherwise, it would have been 32, isn't it, Arvind?
Right, absolutely.
Started with 32.
Right.
So as we became conscious of it, particularly just before the pandemic and during pandemic, post-pandemic, if you see most of the webinars are filled with women leaders, and they seem to be making a lot of impact. So that is one of the reasons why we decided that this is only just a beginning, and one of the reasons why we decided to donate our entire proceeds of royalty on this book to National HRD Network and create some kind of a research fund so that there can be many stories, not only of HR leaders, but to begin with, particularly of women leaders, then get into other kind of sectors. Now we have at this point of time, Professor Vasanthi Srinivasan and one Annapurna and two others, 4 of them who have volunteered to carry this and exclusively work on women leaders. They were debating and discussing among themselves, and one of the conclusions they have come up with, I don't know, they might change their view, is to expand the leadership concept not only to HR, but to entrepreneurs, for NGOs, for civil servants, and a whole lot of other kind of things. Maybe we would recommend them to check with Ashank Desai Centre and see how they could work and then also duplicate or supplement or whatever they need to do with this. Like I think the other day I heard Anita was a wonderful talk. I think she, like her, there seems to be also invited a police officer from Kerala, which was a very interesting kind of thing. So we are hoping that there will be not one, but a series of books that will be written. Maybe the next one will be on women leaders. May cut across. I think this is a question that they will have to. I'm sure in a couple of years' time, that particular thing will not remain as a gap. In fact, one of the issues they were discussing is that the entire, when you look at women leadership, the framework itself may have to be evolved because there may be some unique kind of issues which women leaders face and so on.
Yeah.
So I'm very hopeful, and if our book has this gap, I think this is not a gap, it's an opportunity created for others.
Understood. Great, thanks. Great. I also have, before we conclude, possibly, I also have, there are some people who have raised hands, but I don't know how this is the mechanism to bring them on. But I have one question is that what would be the role of spouses? Okay, in that, in the making?
Yeah.
Any insights on that?
Right. And, if you look at the stories, in number of situations, spouses played a big role, particularly in dealing with reverses and setbacks. Secondly, in the moments when they had to make career choices, when they were traveling across. For example, Harish mentioned he was in Unilever and his family remained in Bangalore.
Yeah.
And it was tough to be with the family because he would be traveling most of the time, and the Unilever practice at that time was that there was an unwritten message that you do come on Saturdays as well. And Harish took upon himself that no, we will work only 5 days a week. And Saturday, Sunday, I'll be in with the family. So that was such overwhelming influence of the spouse that despite long tradition, and his boss was none other than RR himself. And he used to come on Saturday, but he accepted the situation that Harish needs to be back home.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure towards, we are ending, we're closing down slowly, but then maybe, Ashank, would you like, both these speakers are, I'm sure, personally known to you. Okay, would you like to ask any questions?
That's a difficult one. Professor Rao, of course, I can ask him separately, call him anytime today. But yeah. So I have just one question, which is maybe obvious answer, but still I'm asking. What is the inspiration to write this book? Both of you. It sounds very obvious, but I just probing something beyond obviousness that you are from HR.
Right. So, I was fortunate that right at the time when I was in 30s, I was working with HR professionals in National HRD Network, and very impressive people. They were doing terrific work inside their organization as well as in National HRD Network. And I used to be always overwhelmed and highly impressed. And as I grew, I said, someday I should really write stories about them, because those stories will be inspiring for others to read. But it was not until when I actually moved out from the day job and retired way back in 2015 that I had courage to do this heavy lifting of embarking upon this massive project. So that is the honest answer. It was personal curiosity, and it appeared when I talked to TV that it would have a professional purpose as well if we can bring it to the profession.
Great. Very well.
Yeah, I think great. Thanks. I'm sure there is a formal thanks from the center, but my personal thanks to both of you. Professor Rao, of course, I know for last 44 years, to be very exact. I remember the day when he hosted us as a student of IIMA at his house. You may not remember, but I still remember that day. Since then, I have a respect. So thanks especially for coming, Professor Arvind Agarwal and Rao. I must make one statement though. TV, you made that statement about research orientation, and I wouldn't be obviously completely support that.
Yes.
We are, I think, running after something which I've been saying it. I am also to Carol, who is willing to listen as a board member, that you need to see given enough weightage to teaching and the interaction and leadership that you have encountered.
Yeah.
Somehow that balance could be going, other way may not be good idea.
That's right. Yes.
But we wanted that balance, but somewhere I think the pendulum as usual shifts one way or the other. So I do appreciate greatly. In fact, I still remember my friend Sumantra Ghoshal, who used to tell me, he says, Ashank, for my living, of course, I teach, but for my intellectual satisfaction, I do research. It may be read by only 5 people, he would say. So that's really the case. Not that it doesn't matter, it matters research. But I think doing too much for the sake of time is definitely not wrong. So thanks for those comments. I think those who are listening here, many of them are from business school and should take note of it. So thanks for that comment. And as usual, again, thanks for great insights for the book. And I'm looking for that leadership chapter anyway, personally.
Hope we bring that out in form of an article.
Thanks, Professor Varki, for doing it so well with a very, very interesting questions and insightful at that. I was very intently listening, actually, to be honest. Very nice. And of course, Piyush, as usual, great organizer.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you,
So,
Ashank. Thank you.
Great. And also, like on my personal behalf, before I hand it over back to Piyush, actually, thank you. And I also like out of maybe would say that maybe Arvind, you also like did a great contribution along with Professor Rao to the profession, to the field of HR, and to leadership academics by bringing up this, taking up this big burden on your back. And also, I think I should also personally appreciate, I'm sure, I don't know how much you will agree to this, is by choosing this, like the Pope's election process, the grand elector, opts out of the race. I'm sure if somebody else would have written this book, Dr. Arvind Agarwal, you would also have been one of the people who would have been covered in this book. And it's a privilege, okay, being with both of you as as a person who knows both of you and as an HR faculty. Over to Piyush, okay, for the last.
Thank you. Thank you, Biju, and thank you, Ashank, for doing the larger part of my job here for vote of thanks. But what an exciting discussion for sure. I think the leadership storytelling playbook is global in nature. And the global leadership landscape, of course, looks very promising. There are lots of challenges, lots of opportunities, a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world looking at innovative ways. There are new immersive experiences, new technologies, new business models, new leadership strategies, and what have you. So at the Ashank Desai Centre for Leadership, we, of course, profess and harbor large ticket ambitions for active leadership inclusion. Excellent nuggets, I would say, truly, Arvind and TV Rao. Thank you very much for speaking from the heart and sharing those
Thank you.
anecdotal stories from the lives of HR leaders, and being candid about failures as much as successes, and excellent moderation, Professor Biju Varki. So on behalf of the Ashank Desai Centre for Leadership and the Vikram Sarabhai Library at IIMA Ahmedabad, it is a pleasure for me to thank you all. First and foremost, to the leaders out there. We've had yet another unprecedented turnout. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you had a great time. And in conversation with them today was, of course, Professor Biju Varki. Thank you again. We were privileged to have with us today the inimitable Arvind Agarwal and TV Rao. Thank you, Arvind and TV Rao. You guys rock. My personal thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
To speak at the center at IIMA Ahmedabad. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Piyush.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Ashank.
Shank. Thank you,
Have a
Biju.
great night.
Thank you, Shank.
Good evening.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.